The forest pressed against the edges of Wuthering Hollow like a living thing, its shadows reaching farther than they should. I had come here for answers, driven by whispers of curses and a family bound to the woods, but the weight of the place made me doubt my resolve. Adrian Blackwood was waiting for me outside the crumbling inn, his figure half hidden in the twilight. There was something almost feral in the way he moved, a sharpness to his gaze that left me uneasy. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low but urgent. I held up the old journal I'd found, its leather cover worn smooth by time. "You asked for help. I think this has the key to breaking the curse." A howl broke the silence, long and mournful, echoing through the dense trees. Adrian stiffened, his jaw tightening as his eyes flickered toward the forest. "They know you're here now," he muttered, "and they let us leave." As the last of the daylight faded, I could feel the pull of something ancient, watching, waiting. And for the first time, I wondered if breaking the curse would demand more than either of us could give. Chapter 1, Into the Woods, the bus jolted to a stop, its brakes screeching in protest against the narrow dirt road. Lily Carter glanced out the window, her breath fogging the glass as she surveyed the scene. Wuthering Hollow was as remote as advertised, a patchwork of clapboard houses nestled between looming pine forests, their dark green depths stretching to the horizon. The town was wrapped in a mist that seemed to cling to every surface, muting colors and muffling sounds. Lily tightened her grip on her duffel bag. Her advisor had warned her about the isolation, but she hadn't expected it to feel so alive. Every rustle of leaves or faint whistle of wind seemed to carry a whisper, as if the forest itself was speaking. The driver, a grizzled man with a red Sox cap pulled low over his eyes, gave her a once-over. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss?" "Yes," Lily said, her tone firm despite the butterflies in her stomach. He shrugged, pulling the lever to open the door. "Suit yourself. Ain't many buses out of here, though. Next one's not for a week. I'll be fine," she replied, stepping out into the crisp air. As the bus rumbled away, leaving her alone on the unpaved road, Lily took a deep breath. This was her chance to immerse herself in the folklore she'd been studying for years. Wuthering Hollow's legends of ghostly wolves, cursed bloodlines, and spectral guardians were a goldmine for her thesis. If she could capture the stories and their psychological impact on the townsfolk, her work might even get published. But first, she had to settle in. The walk into town was short, and soon she found herself standing in front of a quaint inn called the Hollow Hearth. A wooden sign swung gently on rusted chains, its painted lettering flaking but still legible. Inside, the warm scent of pine and cinnamon greeted her, and a stout woman behind the desk beamed. "You must be Lily," the woman said, her voice bright. "I am Mrs. Halloway. Got your room ready upstairs. You'll love it here, dear, quiet, cozy, and full of stories for someone like you." Lily smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway. I am looking forward to it." "Well, if you need anything, just holler. Dinner's at 6 sharp." After unpacking her few belongings, Lily decided to explore. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she wandered through town, noting the clusters of weathered buildings, the leaning fences, and the occasional wary glance from a passerby. The townsfolk were polite, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, as if they were accustomed to strangers passing through but not staying long. Her path eventually led her to the forest's edge. The pine trees stretched upward like cathedral spires, their trunks forming a dense wall that seemed to hum with life. A sign posted nearby read "No entry after dusk." "For your safety." Lily raised an eyebrow. The warning was unusual, but it only fueled her curiosity. She pulled out her notebook, jotting down observations about the town's atmosphere and the implied fear of the woods. "Not a good idea to linger here," a deep voice said from behind her. She turned, startled. A man stood a few paces away, his dark hair messy and his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. He held a wood-carving knife in one hand and a block of cedar in the other. His clothes, simple jeans and a flannel shirt, were dusted with sawdust, and his boots looked well worn. Sorry, I didn't mean to trespass, Lily said. You re not trespassing. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. His eyes, stormy gray with flecks of silver, were startling against his tanned skin. Just don't he go into the woods, especially at night. Lily tilted her head, intrigued. Why not? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. The forest has its own rules. People who break them don't always come back. Sounds like a great story, she said lightly, trying to ease the tension. I'd love to hear more about it. The corner of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. Be careful what you wish for. Before she could ask more, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees as if he were part of them. That evening, Lily sat in her room, her notebook open on her lap. Adrian Blackwood. That's what the innkeeper had called him when she mentioned the encounter over dinner. He was a reclusive woodworker, known for his craftsmanship and his solitude. The thought of him lingered as the sun dipped below the horizon. Just as she began to close her notebook, a distant howl pierced the night. Her heart skipped. The sound was unearthly, low and mournful, echoing through the hills. She froze, the warning on the sign flashing through her mind. But curiosity tugged at her stronger than fear. Grabbing her jacket, she stepped out into the cool night air. The howl came again, closer this time, and she followed it. The forest loomed ahead, dark and forbidding, but she crossed the threshold. Each step deeper sent shivers down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the strange, almost tangible energy of the place. And then she saw it. A silver-eyed wolf stood in a clearing, its fur gleaming like moonlight. It stared at her, unmoving, its eyes burning with an intelligence that shouldn't belong to an animal. Before she could react, the wolf turned and bounded into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Lily stood there, trembling, her breath visible in the icy air. Something about the wolf had felt familiar. The next morning, she noticed the scratches on Adrian's arms. Chapter 2. A silver gaze. Lily's heart raced as her eyes lingered on the faint red lines trailing down Adrian's forearms. They weren't casual scratches. A brush against brambles or a slip of a carving knife wouldn't have left marks like those. The gashes were deep enough to be painful, and they looked fresh, hastily cleaned but not properly treated. Adrian sat across from her at the communal breakfast table in the hollow hearth, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His usual guarded demeanor was even more pronounced this morning. He barely acknowledged Lily's presence, his gaze fixed on the swirling mist outside the window. Her curiosity burned, but she hesitated to bring it up. Was it possible he didn't know she'd followed the howls last night? You quiet this morning, she said, testing the waters. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Am I? More than usual, she replied with a smile. I guess I am, just trying to figure you out. You don't talk much, but you always seem like you have something on your mind. His lips quirked in something resembling a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some things are better kept in your mind than said out loud. Like why you warning me about the forest? She pressed gently. He set his cup down with a soft clink. You persistent. I am a psychology student at S in my nature. Adrian leaned back, his gaze sharpening. Then let me give you something to analyze. Lily, when people in this town tell you to avoid something, it's not for the sake of superstition. It's for survival. The tone of his voice made her shiver, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. And does that explain the scratches on your arms? His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might get up and leave. Instead, he gave a bitter laugh and shook his head. Curiosity really is dangerous, you know that? Maybe. She tilted her head, watching him closely, but I also think it's necessary. Otherwise, we'd never understand anything worth knowing. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders visibly tense. Stay out of the woods, Lily, especially at night. Whatever you think you saw last night, leave it alone. Her stomach sank. He knew. I never said I was in the woods, she replied carefully. You didn't have to, he said, his voice low but steady. The forest leaves its mark. Lily felt her breath hitch. What is it about the forest, Adrian? Why do you care so much whether I go in or not? For a moment, something flickered across his face, regret, pain, but before she could decipher it, he pushed back his chair and stood. "Stay out of the woods," he repeated, his tone final. "You don't want to end up like me." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Lily tried to distract herself by interviewing locals about the town's history, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Adrian and the silver-eyed wolf. The townsfolk were friendly enough, but whenever she steered the conversation toward the forest, the atmosphere shifted. "That place has always been strange," said Mrs. Halloway, her hands busy folding linens in the inn's parlor. "They say the forest was cursed long before this town was even built. But don't go filling your head with ghost stories, dear. They read just old tales. Old tales often have a kernel of truth," Lily replied. "What kind of curse?" Mrs. Halloway's smile faltered. "It's not my place to say. Some things are best left buried." Lily heard variations of the same sentiment throughout the day. The forest was dangerous. The forest was cursed. The forest should be left alone. By evening, her frustration had reached a peak. She sat in her room, staring at the notes she decompiled, none of which painted a clear picture. What was the curse? How did Adrian fit into it? And why did the silver-eyed wolf feel so familiar? Unable to sit still, she grabbed her coat and ventured downstairs. The common room was empty except for Mrs. Halloway, who gave her a knowing look. "Out for a walk." Lily nodded. "Just some fresh air. Be careful, dear." The night air was cool and damp, the faint scent of pine drifting in on the breeze. Lily's steps carried her toward the edge of town, where the forest loomed like a dark, silent sentinel. Her flashlight cut a narrow path through the shadows, but it did little to banish the sense of unease creeping up her spine. She stopped near the same sign as the night before: "No entry after dusk. For your safety." The howls came again, faint but distinct. This time she hesitated. Adrian's warnings echoed in her mind, but curiosity gnawed at her. She couldn't let this go. "Just a little farther," she murmured to herself. The forest was quieter than she expected, the only sounds her boots crunching against fallen leaves and the occasional rustle of branches. The howls grew louder, their mournful notes filling the air, and then she saw it again. The silver-eyed wolf stepped into the beam of her flashlight, its fur shimmering like liquid mercury. It stared at her, unblinking, as if daring her to move closer. "Adrian," she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop herself. The wolf's ears twitched and its head tilted slightly, almost as if in recognition. Lily's pulse quickened. Her hand trembled as she reached for her notebook, desperate to capture the moment. But the wolf didn't wait. With a low growl, it turned and darted deeper into the woods. "Wait," she called, taking a step forward. Something stopped her: a sharp, cold wind that seemed to push her back, carrying with it a strange scent of cedar and iron. Her flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadows seemed to writhe. And then everything went still. The next morning, Lily sat at the breakfast table again, her head spinning with questions. Adrian walked in late, his hair damp and his flannel rumpled. The scratches on his arms were still there, though they looked less inflamed. He didn't say anything as he sat down across from her, but his silver-gray eyes locked onto hers as if he could see right through her. "You didn't listen," he said quietly. Lily swallowed hard. "What are you?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, with a sigh, he leaned forward and said, "Someone you should stay far away from." Chapter 3. The hollow shadows. Lily's stomach tightened at Adrian's words, but she refused to let fear overshadow her curiosity. His presence carried a weight, a silent command that warned her not to push further. Yet she couldn't ignore the way his gaze lingered on her, as though he was searching for something: answers, perhaps, or confirmation of what she already knew. Adrian didn't wait for her response. He stood, leaving his half-finished coffee, and walked out of the hollow hearth without another word. Lily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Adrian's warning wasn't just about the forest, it was about himself. The scratches on his arms, his cryptic words, the wolf that seemed to know her name, it all pointed to one thing: Adrian was connected to the forest in a way he couldn't or wouldn't explain. Later that day, Lily decided to shift her focus to the town itself. If Adrian wouldn't he talk, maybe someone else would. Weathering Hollow was an insular place, but every secret had a crack where light could seep in. Her first stop was the local library, a quaint two-story building with ivy climbing its weathered stone walls. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of old books. Shelves groaned under the weight of heavy tomes, and a single librarian, a stern woman with sharp features, looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" the librarian asked, her voice clipped. "I am researching local folklore," Lily said, offering her most disarming smile. "Do you have any records or books about Weathering Hollow's history?" The librarian studied her for a moment before nodding. "Follow me." She led Lily to a small section in the back of the library. The books here were older, their spines cracked and titles faded. Some looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. "These are the public records and local histories," the librarian said, "but be careful. Some of these are fragile." "Thank you," Lily said, already reaching for a worn leather-bound book titled Legends of the Hollow. As the librarian returned to her desk, Lily settled into a quiet corner and began flipping through the pages. The book was a treasure trove of local myths, tales of ghostly apparitions, strange lights in the forest, and most prominently, wolves. One passage caught her attention in the days before Weathering Hollow became a town. It is said that a pact was made between man and beast. A powerful wolf, its fur silver as the moonlight, guarded the forest, and in return the villagers offered tribute. But when the pact was broken, the guardian cursed the land. From that day forth, the line between man and beast would blur, and the forest would demand its price. Lily frowned. The story was vague, but it resonated with what she'd already seen. Could Adrian be part of this blurring line? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She turned the page and found a sketch of a wolf with piercing silver eyes. It was hauntingly similar to the wolf she'd encountered in the forest. Beneath the sketch, a single phrase was scrawled bear the mark of the wolf. When Lily left the library, dusk was already settling over the town. She clutched her notebook tightly, her thoughts swirling. The more she uncovered, the more the lines between folklore and reality seemed to blur. As she walked back toward the hollow hearth, she noticed a group of townsfolk gathered near the general store. Their voices were low, but their expressions were tense. Lily slowed her pace, straining to catch snippets of their conversation. "Another sighting near the mill. Can keep ignoring this. What about Blackwood? He's always in the woods." At the mention of Adrian's name, Lily's heart skipped. She edged closer, pretending to examine a nearby display of produce. "Blackwood's trouble," one man muttered. "Always has been. If it weren't for his craftsmanship, the town wouldn't tolerate him." "Leave him be," another said. "You know what his family's been through. That doesn't excuse him skulking around the woods like some wild animal." Lily's curiosity burned, but she knew better than to interrupt. Instead, she slipped away, her mind racing with questions. What had Adrian's family been through? And why was he always associated with the forest? That night, Lily couldn't sleep. The shadows outside her window seemed to shift, and the wind carried faint whispers that made her skin prickle. She sat up, hugging her knees to her chest as she stared at the journal from the library. The phrase mark of the wolf played over and over in her mind. Unable to bear the silence, she got dressed and crept downstairs. The common room was dark and empty, save for the faint glow of the dying fire. Lily slipped outside, the cold air biting at her skin. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed answers. The forest loomed ahead, its dark silhouette both inviting and menacing. She stopped at the edge, her flashlight in hand. The sign was there again, its words etched into her memory: "No entry after dusk." "For your safety." Lily's grip on the flashlight tightened. She knew she shouldn't go in, but the thought of turning back felt unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the threshold. The forest was alive in a way it wasn't during the day. The trees whispered, their branches swaying without wind. The ground seemed to pulse beneath her feet as though the earth itself was breathing. And then she heard it, the howl. Low and mournful, it sent a shiver down her spine. She followed the sound, her steps careful but determined. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a clearing. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver beams onto the ground. At the center of the clearing stood the wolf. It watched her with those piercing silver eyes, its posture tense but not threatening. Lily's breath caught. There was something undeniably human in its gaze, a sorrow, a longing and a warning. "Adrian," she whispered again, though she wasn't sure why. The wolf's ears twitched and it took a step closer. Its movements were graceful, almost deliberate, as though it was trying to communicate. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. The wolf tilted its head, then turned abruptly, trotting toward the edge of the clearing. It stopped and looked back at her, as if beckoning her to follow. Lily hesitated, her heart pounding. Every instinct told her to turn back, but something deeper, a pull she couldn't explain, urged her forward. She took a step, and then another, following the silver-eyed wolf into the shadows. Chapter 4, Crossing Lines. The forest seemed to close around Lily as she followed the silver-eyed wolf, her flashlight beam cutting through the dense shadows. The air grew colder, and the whispers of the trees turned into a low hum, almost like a heartbeat. Each step she took felt heavier, as though the forest itself resisted her presence. The wolf moved with an unearthly grace, its silver fur shimmering like liquid moonlight. It glanced back occasionally, its intelligent eyes locking with hers, urging her forward. Despite her fear, Lily couldn't bring herself to stop. She felt as if she were on the edge of a revelation, a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew. As they ventured deeper, the woods grew stranger. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches clawing at the sky, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, almost spongy. Her flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment she was plunged into darkness. "Wait," she called out, her voice trembling. The wolf stopped, its ears perking at the sound of her voice. It waited patiently as she caught up, its silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The wolf didn't respond, of course it didn't, but something about its gaze felt like an answer. It turned and continued walking, leading her into a small clearing where an ancient tree stood at its center. The tree was massive, its gnarled roots twisting out of the ground like frozen serpents. Its bark was dark and slick, almost as if it were wet, and faint silver streaks ran along its surface, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of earth and something metallic like blood. The wolf stopped at the base of the tree and sat down, its gaze fixed on Lily. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice shaking. She approached the tree cautiously, her flashlight illuminating its strange, shimmering bark. There was something carved into the trunk, a series of intricate symbols that looked both ancient and deliberate. She reached out to trace one of them, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface. The moment her skin made contact, a sharp pain shot through her hand, and she pulled back with a gasp. Blood welled up from a thin cut on her palm, bright and vivid against her pale skin. The wolf let out a low growl, its posture shifting. "I didn't mean to," Lily started, but the words died in her throat as the symbols on the tree began to glow brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. The hum in the air grew louder, resonating in her chest, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. She stumbled back, her heart pounding as the tree emitted a low, mournful sound like the groan of something ancient waking from a long sleep. The wolf stepped between her and the tree, its growl growing deeper, more protective. "What's happening?" Lily whispered, clutching her bleeding hand. Before she could move, the glow from the tree surged, and a vision flooded her mind. She saw the forest as it once was, vibrant and alive, untouched by the scars of human hands. In the vision, a group of people stood in a circle around the ancient tree, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. They were performing a ritual, their voices low and melodic. At the center of the circle was a silver-eyed wolf, its body chained to the ground. It howled in defiance, its voice carrying a power that shook the earth. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a blade that gleamed under the moonlight. They pressed the blade to their palm, letting their blood drip onto the wolf's fur. "With this bond, we protect the forest," a voice echoed in Lily's mind. "With this blood, we bind the guardian to our will." The wolf's howl turned into a roar of pain and fury as the symbols on the tree began to glow. The vision blurred, and Lily caught glimpses of what came next: centuries of bloodshed, betrayal, and sacrifice, all tied to the cursed pact forged that night. The vision ended abruptly, and Lily stumbled back, gasping for air. The wolf was still in front of her, its body tense, its silver eyes watching her with a mixture of concern and something else: recognition. "Adrian," she said, her voice breaking. "It's you, isn't it? You re the guardian." The wolf didn't respond, but its gaze said enough. She sank to her knees, her head spinning. "How long have you been like this? Why?" The wolf let out a low whine, stepping closer to her. It pressed its nose gently against her injured hand, the warmth of its breath calming her racing heart. Lily swallowed hard, her mind racing. If Adrian was the wolf, and she was certain now that he was, then the curse wasn't just a story. It was real, and it had trapped him in this inhuman form. "I am going to figure this out," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "I'll help you. I swear." The wolf tilted its head, as if unsure whether to believe her. Then, with a quiet huff, it turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Lily returned to the hollow hearth just before dawn, exhausted but determined. She cleaned and bandaged her hand, her mind replaying the events in the clearing over and over. She knew what she had to do. The answers lay in the town's history, buried in its old stories and forgotten rituals. If she was going to break the curse, she needed to uncover the truth about the pact and Adrian's role in it. But as the sun rose over Weathering Hollow, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Somewhere in the forest, the silver-eyed wolf waited. Chapter 5, The Mark of the Wolf. The morning brought little comfort. Though sunlight streamed through her window, illuminating the small room in the hollow hearth, Lily felt the weight of the night pressing against her chest. Her hand throbbed, the thin cut on her palm now bandaged, but the pain wasn't what preoccupied her. Adrian was the wolf. She was sure of it. The ancient tree, the glowing symbols, and the haunting vision of a cursed pact were burned into her memory. The town's warnings about the forest weren't just rooted in superstition, they were echoes of a grim truth. But why Adrian? And why now? She dressed quickly, grabbed her notebook, and made her way downstairs. The inn's parlor was quiet except for the crackle of the hearth. Mrs. Halloway was busy dusting shelves, humming softly to herself. "Morning, dear," she said brightly. "You look like you didn't get much sleep." Lily offered a faint smile. "You could say that. Well, breakfast is on the table. Coffee as fresh." "Thanks, but I am heading out early today," Lily said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Mrs. Halloway paused, her brow furrowing. "You're not planning to go back into those woods, are you?" Lily hesitated. "I am not sure yet." "Why do you ask?" The older woman sighed, setting down her dusting cloth. "The forest doesn't take kindly to strangers poking around. People go in, thinking they chasing a bit of adventure, and they come back changed if they come back at all." "What do you mean by changed?" Mrs. Halloway's gaze darkened. "You'll hear it if you stick around long enough. Folks talk about feeling marked by the woods. Nightmares, strange cravings even, seeing things that aren't there. And then there's the Blackwoods." Lily's heart skipped at the name. "What about them?" The innkeeper lowered her voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. "That family's been tied to the forest for generations. Adrian's parents, God rest their souls, used to warn folks just like he does now. But no one listens. They gone, and now he carries the burden alone." "What kind of burden?" Lily pressed, her pulse quickening. Mrs. Halloway shook her head. "You'd have to ask him yourself. But good luck getting answers, he's always been tight-lipped." "Just be careful, Lily. The forest has a way of pulling people in too deep. Lily spent the morning combing through the library again, but the answers she sought remained elusive. Most of the records in the folklore section were vague or incomplete, and the few details about the Blackwood family were frustratingly sparse. She found one account that caught her attention, a diary entry from a local woman dated over a century ago. The Blackwoods are not like us. They belong to the forest more than to the town. My mother says they carry the mark, though they hide it well. I saw Adrian Blackwood's ancestor, Samuel, return from the woods last night, his eyes glowing like the moon. He is not a man anymore. Lily's fingers trembled as she read the words. The mark. It was the same phrase she'd seen in the vision. What did it mean? By midday, Lily was back in town, wandering the narrow streets as she tried to piece together what she'd learned. Her mind returned to Adrian's warnings, his cryptic words about survival, and the way he'd looked at her that morning after the night in the forest. She found herself outside his workshop, a small building tucked at the edge of town, surrounded by stacks of wood and half-finished carvings. The faint scent of cedar hung in the air. Lily hesitated, unsure if she should knock, but the door was already ajar. "Adrian," she called, stepping inside. The workshop was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a large window that let in slivers of pale sunlight. Wooden sculptures filled the space, wolves, deer, bears, and even more abstract forms that seemed almost alive. The room smelled of sawdust and varnish, and the rhythmic sound of carving echoed softly from the back. Adrian was hunched over a workbench, his hands deftly shaping a block of wood. His flannel sleeves were rolled up, revealing the now healing scratches on his arms. "You re persistent," he said without looking up. "I have questions," Lily said, her voice firm. "I am sure you do." He set the carving knife down and finally turned to face her. His gray eyes were sharp, but there was a weariness in them, as though he'd been carrying a weight far too heavy for one person. "Last night," she began, stepping closer, "you were the wolf. Where'n't you?" Adrian's expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to shift. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, his voice low. "I didn't have a choice." I saw she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I saw something." "The tree, the symbols. A vision of a ritual. What is the mark of the wolf?" His jaw tightened. "You saw more than you were supposed to. Then explain it to me." Lily's voice wavered, but she pressed on. "I am not afraid of the truth, Adrian. Whatever this is, whatever's happening to you, I want to help." Adrian let out a bitter laugh. "Help? You don't even know what you're offering to step into. Then tell me." She snapped, frustration bubbling over. "Because I am not walking away from this. I can tell. Not when I am already in the middle of it." Adrian's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment he seemed to wrestle with himself. Then, with a resigned sigh, he leaned back against the workbench. "The mark of the wolf isn't just a curse," he said. "It's a bond. My family was tied to the forest centuries ago, tasked with protecting it. But that bond came at a cost. The forest demands blood, and once the mark takes hold, there's no escaping it." "Is that why you transform?" Lily asked carefully. He nodded. "The wolf is part of me. It's not just a form, it's who I am. And the longer I carry the mark, the harder it is to stay human." Lily's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "There has to be a way to break the curse." Adrian shook his head. "Many have tried. None have succeeded. And even if it were possible, the forest would never let me go without a fight." Lily stepped closer, her voice soft but determined. "Then we fight it together." Adrian stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand what you're offering, Lily. The forest doesn't just mark people, it consumes them. If you get too close, it'll take you too." "Maybe," she said. "But if we don't try, it'll take you first." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared burden hanging between them. Finally, Adrian nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through his guarded exterior. "Then we'll start with the tree," he said. "But once we cross that line, there's no turning back." Lily swallowed hard, steeling herself. "I've already crossed it." Chapter 6, Bloodlines and Bonds. The storm outside was relentless. battering the small cabin with howling winds and torrents of rain. Lily sat across from Adrian, the dim light of a lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls of his workshop. The space was quieter now, the smell of cedar and varnish faint beneath the scent of wet earth. After their conversation that afternoon, Adrian had agreed to tell her everything he knew about the curse, but only once the storm forced them both to take refuge indoors. Adrian leaned against the workbench, his arms crossed, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. He seemed reluctant to speak, as though the act of sharing his family's story would make the curse even heavier. "You said the mark of the wolf is a bond," Lily prompted gently. "How did it begin?" Adrian sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "It started centuries ago, long before Weathering Hollow was a town. My ancestors were settlers here, farmers and woodsmen trying to carve out a life on the edge of the wilderness. But the forest, it wasn't just land to them. It was alive in ways they couldn't understand." He paused, his gaze distant. The forest wasn't just home to animals. It had protectors, wolves, larger and smarter than any ordinary beast. They were territorial, and my ancestors, in their desperation, crossed into sacred ground. They cut down ancient trees, hunted prey that wasn't theirs to take. "And the forest fought back," Lily said, piecing the story together. Adrian nodded. "The wolves attacked. At first it was just livestock, but then they came for the settlers themselves. My ancestors didn't have the strength to fight them, so they tried something else, a pact. They sought out the leader of the wolves, a great silver-eyed beast, and offered blood to seal the bargain. In exchange for the forest's protection, they swore to become its guardians." "But they broke the pact," Lily said, remembering the vision she'd seen. "They did," Adrian confirmed. "Generations later, greed or desperation, no one knows for sure, led them to betray the forest. The details are lost, but the punishment wasn't. The mark of the wolf was placed on my bloodline, binding us to the forest in a way we could never escape." His voice grew softer, tinged with bitterness. "The wolf isn't just a curse. It's the forest's way of ensuring we never forget our place. We protect the woods, whether we want to or not." Lily frowned, her notebook open on her lap, her pen hovering above the page. "But you're not the only one left in your family, right? Why does the curse seem to fall so heavily on you?" Adrian's expression darkened. He turned away, his shoulders tense. "I am the last of the Blackwoods." Her heart sank. "What happened to the others? They couldn't handle it," he said quietly. "My parents tried to find a way out, but the curse doesn't leave room for hope. My father, he lost himself to the wolf completely. One night, he ran into the forest and never came back. My mother lasted longer, but the strain, it broke her." Lily swallowed hard. She couldn't imagine carrying that kind of weight alone. "I've done everything I can to keep people safe," Adrian continued. "But the forest doesn't forgive. It takes what it wants and it never lets go." The storm raged on outside, lightning flashing across the sky. Lily's thoughts churned as she tried to process everything. Adrian had lived his entire life under the shadow of a curse he hadn't asked for, forced to balance his humanity with the pull of the wolf. "There has to be a way to break it," she said finally. Adrian shook his head. "The only way to break the bond is to undo the pact itself. But the tree, the heart of the forest, has guarded the pact for centuries. It doesn't let anyone near it without a fight. I've seen the tree," Lily said, her voice firm, "and I've seen what it can do. The symbols carved into it, the way it reacted to my touch, it's alive, Adrian. It's protecting something. That's the problem," Adrian said grimly. "It protects the curse. Every attempt to destroy it has failed. The forest defends itself." Lily leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "But you're not just anyone. You're tied to the forest in a way no one else is. And I've already seen what happens when I touch the tree. Maybe together, we can force it to reveal the truth." Adrian's gaze softened, but his jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're asking. If we push too far, the forest will retaliate. You've seen how it reacts, it marks anyone who gets too close. I don't care, Lily said. I've already started this, Adrian. I am not going to walk away now. He studied her for a long moment, his silver eyes searching hers. Finally, he nodded, though there was a shadow of fear in his expression. Then we'll need to prepare, he said. If we're going to face the tree, we can do it unarmed. What kind of preparation are we talking about? Adrian turned back to his workbench, pulling open a drawer and retrieving a small, worn book. Its leather cover was cracked, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. This belonged to my mother, he said. It's a collection of rituals and old knowledge passed down through my family. If there's a way to weaken the tree's hold, it'll be in here. Lily accepted the book with reverence, flipping through its pages. The text was dense, written in a mix of English and symbols she didn't recognize. This will take time to decode, she said. We'll work on it together, Adrian said. But we have to be careful. If the forest senses what we're doing, it won't just sit back and let us dismantle the curse. For the next several hours, they pored over the book, the storm outside providing a fitting backdrop to their grim work. The pages revealed fragments of rituals tied to the forest offerings of blood, invocations of ancient names, and warnings about the price of interfering with the pact. One passage stood out to Lily to sever the bond. One must confront the guardian and the heart as one. The blood of the marked and the unmarked must unite to break the chain. She turned the book toward Adrian, her finger tracing the words. This is it. This is how we break the curse. Adrian read the passage, his face pale. Blood of the marked and the unmarked. It means me and you. Lily nodded. I think so. If we work together, we might be able to force the tree to release you. Adrian's jaw clenched. But the guardian isn't just the wolf. It's the forest itself. If we do this, the forest will fight back with everything it has. Then we'll fight harder, Lily said, her voice steady. You've been carrying this alone for too long. It's time to end it. Adrian looked at her, his expression torn between hope and fear. You don't know what you're risking. I do, Lily said, meeting his gaze. And I am not backing down. The storm outside began to wane, but the storm within the cabin was only beginning. Together, they prepared to face the heart of the forest, knowing that whatever lay ahead would change them both forever. Chapter 7, Secrets in the Library. The morning after the storm dawned with an eerie calm. The clouds that had blanketed Weathering Hollow were gone, leaving behind a pale, washed-out sky. The forest loomed in the distance, its edges hazy with mist, as if retreating into its own secrets. Lily stepped out of Adrian's workshop, clutching the worn ritual book to her chest. The urgency of their mission pulsed in her veins, but she knew they couldn't rush headlong into the forest without understanding the full scope of the curse and the risks. We need more than this, she said, turning to Adrian, who stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. He frowned. You think the library will have anything the book doesn't? It might, she said. If your family's history is tied to the curse, there's a chance someone else recorded it, someone who wasn't trying to protect the forest's secrets. Adrian hesitated but finally nodded. I'll come with you. Lily shook her head. No, you've been keeping a low profile in town, and I've already heard how some people talk about you. If they see us together, it might make them even more suspicious. His eyes narrowed. I don't care what they think. I know you don't, she said softly. But I need to do this on my own. Trust me. For a moment, Adrian looked like he might argue, but then he sighed, leaning against the doorframe. Fine, but don't take too long. If something goes wrong, the forest won't give you a second chance. Lily gave him a reassuring nod before heading toward town, the ritual book tucked securely in her bag. The library was quiet, as always. Its musty smell and the faint creak of the floorboards underfoot gave it a timeless quality, like a place untouched by the chaos outside. Lily made her way to the folklore section, where she'd already spent hours combing through dusty books and records. But today, She had a clearer purpose to find anything that might connect the Blackwood family to the Forest-S curse. She scanned the shelves until her fingers brushed against a faded leather-bound volume titled Histories and Hauntings of Weathering Hollow. The book had been written by a local historian nearly a century ago, and its pages were filled with accounts of strange occurrences and old rumors. Lily found a quiet corner and opened the book, flipping through its brittle pages. Her heart raced as she spotted a section labeled The Pact of the Wolves. The text read, "In the early days of Weathering Hollow, the settlers spoke of wolves that were more than animals. These creatures were said to be the Forest-S guardians, bound by an ancient power older than the land itself. The Blackwood family, among the first to settle the area, forged a pact with the wolves, offering blood and loyalty in exchange for safe passage and fertile land. But pacts are fragile things. One generation strayed too far, cutting down sacred trees and breaking their vows. In their betrayal, the forest unleashed its fury, binding the Blackwoods to the land they had wronged. To this day, the bloodline carries the mark of their penance, forever tethered to the wolves and the Forest-S will." Lily's hands trembled as she read the passage. The story aligned with what Adrian had told her, but this account confirmed the deeper truth the curse wasn't just about punishment. It was about control. As she flipped the page, her breath caught. A crude map of the forest was sketched across the paper, its lines faded but still legible. At the center of the map was a symbol that matched the ones carved into the ancient tree, a spiral surrounded by claw-like marks. Beneath the map was a scrawled note beware the tree at the heart of the hollow. "It is both the key and the lock. Only the marked can confront its power, but they will not leave unchanged." Lily traced the lines of the map with her finger, memorizing the landmarks. If she and Adrian were going to confront the tree, this map could guide them. Her search wasn't over. Determined to uncover more, Lily combed through the library's archives, pulling old newspapers and journals from dusty shelves. She stumbled across a record that made her heart ache, an obituary for Adrian's parents. The article was brief, almost clinical. William and Evelyn Blackwood, longtime residents of Weathering Hollow, were reported missing after entering the forest late one evening. Despite an extensive search, no trace of the couple was found. Locals mourn the loss of the Blackwoods, who were known for their craftsmanship and quiet dedication to the community. The date was 15 years ago. Lily closed the file, her chest tight. Adrian had told her how the curse had destroyed his family, but seeing it laid out in black and white made the weight of his loss even more real. Lily left the library just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. Her bag felt heavier now, laden with the knowledge she'd uncovered. The walk back to Adrian's workshop was brisk, her thoughts racing as she pieced together what they'd need to face the tree. When she arrived, Adrian was outside, splitting logs for the fire. His shirt was damp with sweat, and his movements were quick and precise, each swing of the axe punctuated by a dull thud. "I found something," Lily said, her voice urgent. Adrian straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "What is it?" She pulled the map from her bag, holding it out for him to see. "This. It has a map of the forest and it shows the location of the tree." Adrian's eyes narrowed as he studied the faded lines. "Where did you find this?" "In an old book at the library. It matches everything we've seen so far: the pact, the tree, the curse. It even mentions the marks on the tree as both the key and the lock." Adrian's expression darkened. "And the part where it says no one leaves unchanged." Lily hesitated. "I saw that too, but we can't let that stop us." Adrian's jaw tightened. "This isn't just a ritual, Lily. It's a battle. The forest won't let us walk away unscathed." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't confront the tree, the curse will keep destroying everything it touches." For a moment, Adrian didn't respond. Then he nodded, his silver eyes filled with resolve. "We'll leave at first light." That night, as Lily lay in the small bed at the hollow hearth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching her. The symbols she'd seen, the whispers in the woods, and the silver-eyed wolf's haunting gaze all swirled in her mind. Tomorrow, they would face the heart of the hollow, and whatever waited for them there would change their lives forever. Chapter 8. The wolf's warning. Dawn came slowly, the pale light creeping through a heavy mist that clung to the forest. The air was damp and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet earth. Lily packed her bag in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. The map she'd found at the library was folded carefully in her pocket, its fragile edges worn but still legible. By the time she reached Adrian's workshop, he was already waiting outside, his flannel shirt buttoned to the collar and a pack slung over his shoulder. His silver-gray eyes flicked to her as she approached, a mix of apprehension and determination in his gaze. "You ready for this?" he asked. "Not really," she admitted, her voice trembling with a nervous laugh. "But I am not backing out." He nodded, his expression softening for just a moment. "Good, because once we start, there's no stopping." The journey into the forest was unlike any of Lily's previous visits. The woods felt alive in a way that made her skin crawl. Branches swayed without wind, shadows shifted in the corner of her vision, and the faint hum she'd felt before was now a steady pulse, like a heartbeat beneath her feet. Adrian led the way, moving through the dense underbrush with practiced ease. He didn't speak, his focus fixed on the path ahead. Lily followed closely, clutching her flashlight even though the growing daylight made it unnecessary. "Is it always like this?" she asked after a long silence. "Worse," Adrian replied without looking back. "The deeper we go, the stronger it gets. The forest knows we're coming." "That's comforting," Lily muttered, though she didn't expect a reply. Hours passed as they navigated the twisting paths, the map serving as their guide. The landmarks sketched on the fragile page began to materialize around them, an ancient, moss-covered boulder here, a creek winding through the roots of a massive oak there. Finally, they reached a ridge that overlooked a small, mist-shrouded valley. At its center stood the tree. Even from a distance, it radiated power. Its massive trunk was dark and gnarled, its roots sprawling across the ground like veins. The faint silver glow that Lily remembered was more pronounced now, pulsing in rhythm with the forest's hum. Adrian stopped, his jaw tightening. "There it is." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. "What now?" "We follow the plan," he said. "We get close, perform the ritual, and try to sever the bond. If the forest lets us." Lily swallowed hard, her grip on her flashlight tightening. "And if it doesn't?" Adrian didn't answer. The descent into the valley was slow, every step heavy with tension. As they drew closer to the tree, the air grew colder, each breath visible in the damp mist. The forest seemed to close in around them, the distant sounds of wildlife fading into an oppressive silence. When they finally reached the clearing, Lily's chest tightened. Up close, the tree was even more imposing. Its bark shimmered faintly with the same symbols she'd seen in her vision, and the ground around it was littered with broken branches and disturbed earth, as if the forest itself had been in a battle. Adrian set down his pack and pulled out the ritual book, flipping to the marked page. "You remember what we talked about?" Lily nodded. "Our blood, yours and mine, needs to touch the tree at the same time. It's the only way to break the bond." He glanced at her, his expression grim. "And you remember what happens if it doesn't work?" "Yes," she said quietly. As Adrian prepared the ritual, Lily took a step closer to the tree, her heart pounding. The symbols carved into its bark seemed to glow brighter the nearer she got, and the faint hum in the air grew into a low, resonant vibration that made her bones ache. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the surface of the tree. "Don't touch it yet," Adrian warned, his voice sharp. She pulled her hand back, startled. "Sorry, it's like it's calling to me. That's how it starts," he said. "The forest wants you to think it's safe. But the moment you give in, it takes everything." Lily shivered, stepping back to stand beside him. With the ritual prepared, Adrian turned to her, holding a small knife. "This is it," he said. "Once we do this, the forest will fight back. You have to stay focused, no matter what happens. I understand, Lily said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Adrian sliced a shallow line across his palm, the blood welling up bright and vivid. He handed the knife to Lily, who hesitated for only a moment before doing the same. On 3, he said. 1, 2, a deafening howl tore through the clearing, cutting him off. Lily spun around, her heart racing. From the shadows of the trees, glowing eyes appeared, dozens of them. Wolves emerged from the darkness, their bodies massive and their eyes reflecting the same silver light as Adrian-'s. They rehear, Adrian said, his voice low. The wolves. Lily whispered, her eyes wide. No, he stepped in front of her, his expression grim. The forest. The wolves circled the clearing, their low growls rumbling like thunder. They didn't attack, but their presence was overwhelming, a living manifestation of the forest's will. Adrian turned to Lily, his silver eyes gleaming. We didn't have much time. Are you ready? She nodded, clutching the knife tightly. Let us do this. Together they stepped forward, their hands outstretched. The moment their blood touched the tree, the clearing erupted in chaos. The symbols on the bark flared to life, glowing with an intensity that blinded them both. The ground shook violently, and the air was filled with a deafening roar that sounded like the forest itself screaming in rage. The wolves howled in unison, their voices piercing the cacophony. The light from the trees spread outward in tendrils, wrapping around Adrian and Lily like glowing vines. Lily screamed as a searing pain shot through her palm, spreading up her arm and into her chest. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. Stay with me, Adrian shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. Through the haze of pain, Lily saw the tree begin to crack, its bark splitting open to reveal a blinding core of silver light. The tendrils tightened around them, pulling them closer to the tree. We're almost there, Adrian yelled. Didn't he let go? Lily gritted her teeth, her fingers digging into the tree's surface. The light grew brighter, and the world seemed to tilt around her, the forest spinning into a vortex of sound and fury. And then, with a final, ear-splitting crack, the light exploded, consuming everything. When the light faded, Lily found herself on the ground, gasping for air. The clearing was silent, the wolves gone, and the tree. The tree stood in ruins, its once imposing form reduced to splintered wood and ash. Lily turned her head, searching for Adrian. He lay a few feet away, his body still. Adrian, she cried, crawling toward him. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were pure silver. Then the glow faded, leaving behind a soft, human gray. It worked, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lily felt tears prick her eyes as she helped him sit up. The weight of the forest was gone, but the aftermath of their battle lingered in the air. The curse was broken, but the price of their victory had yet to reveal itself. Chapter 9. A town divided. The days following the destruction of the tree were quiet but tense, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The ancient hum that had once resonated beneath Weathering Hollow was gone, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. The air felt lighter, yet something about the town seemed heavier, a nervous energy that clung to the people like a shadow. Lily sat on the front steps of the hollow hearth, staring out at the mist-shrouded streets. Her thoughts were still tangled with the events in the forest. She replayed every moment countless times: the wolves, the tree's eruption of light, Adrian's silver eyes fading to gray. Adrian had survived, and the bond with the forest appeared to be severed, but the cost of their victory still haunted her. "Morning, dear," Mrs. Halloway said, stepping out of the inn with a tray of steaming mugs. "You've been quieter than usual lately." "Just thinking," Lily said, managing a small smile. Mrs. Halloway set the tray down beside her. "Well, whatever you and Adrian stirred up out there, the whole town's been buzzing. People are talking, and not all of it's friendly." Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" The older woman sighed, lowering her voice. "The forest feels wrong. Some folks think you've done something unnatural, tampered with forces you shouldn't have." "We ended a curse," Lily said firmly. "That's all. I know that, and Adrian knows it. But this town has a long memory and people don't like change. Especially when it comes to the forest. Lily's stomach churned. She expected resistance but not outright hostility. What are they saying about Adrian? Mrs. Halloway hesitated, then patted Lily's shoulder. You should talk to him yourself. Lily found Adrian at his workshop, where he was stacking freshly cut logs in the yard. His movements were slower than usual, his face pale and drawn, but he was standing a testament to his resilience after their ordeal. Hey, she called softly. He looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. Hey, you doing okay? Lily stepped closer, her arms crossed against the chill. I was about to ask you the same thing. Adrian gave a wry smile. I am alive, so that's a start. Feels strange, though, like I am not entirely sure who I am without the wolf. She tilted her head. Do you miss it? His smile faded and he turned back to the logs. No, but it's hard to shake the feeling that something's missing. The wolf was a curse, but it was also me. Lily placed a hand on his arm. You re-still you, Adrian. The curse didn't define you, it just made you forget who you were. He looked down at her hand, then back at her, his gaze softening. Thanks. She smiled faintly, but her expression quickly turned serious. Adrian, Mrs. Halloway said people are talking. About the forest. About us. He sighed, setting down the log he was holding. Yeah, Ivy heard. Some of the townsfolk are blaming us for what happened. They think breaking the curse has thrown the forest out of balance. That's ridiculous, Lily said, frustration flaring in her chest. The curse was the imbalance. The forest was controlling you, Adrian. That's not natural, it's cruel. Try telling them that, he said bitterly. This town thrives on fear. The forest has always been something to respect, but also something to be afraid of. Without that fear, they don't know what to do. That afternoon, Lily and Adrian decided to visit the center of town, hoping to gauge the mood firsthand. As they walked along the cobblestone streets, heads turned and whispers followed them. Here they come, one man muttered, his voice low but loud enough for Lily to hear. The ones who stirred up the forest. An older woman shook her head. I told you the Blackwoods were trouble. And now he's dragging that girl into it. Adrian stiffened beside her, but Lily grabbed his hand, squeezing it in silent reassurance. Let them talk, she whispered. Near the general store, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. A man stepped forward, his weathered features hard with disapproval. Adrian, he said, his voice heavy with accusation. What have you done to the forest? Adrian met his gaze calmly. We broke the curse, Henry, that's all. Broke the curse, Henry scoffed. More like broke the balance. The forest feels wrong now, quiet, empty. It's not natural. It wasn't natural before, Lily interjected, her voice firm. The forest wasn't alive, it was enslaved. The curse was holding Adrian and his family hostage for generations. Ending it was the right thing to do. Henry turned his sharp gaze on her. And what would you know about it, outsider? You've been here a few weeks and think you understand the Hollow better than those of us who've lived here all our lives. Enough, Adrian said, his tone cutting through the tension. Lily's right. The curse wasn't balance, it was punishment. And if the forest feels different now, it's because it's finally free. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged doubtful glances. You've always been trouble, Blackwood, Henry said, his voice low. And now you've dragged the rest of us into it. If anything happens because of this at 1T, Adrian interrupted. The forest will heal, and so will the town. Henry scowled but said nothing more, turning and walking away. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Adrian and Lily standing alone. As the sun set over Weathering Hollow, Adrian and Lily returned to his workshop. The confrontation in town had left them both drained, but a quiet sense of accomplishment lingered between them. They'll come around, Lily said as they sat on the steps outside. Maybe, Adrian said, staring out at the darkening forest. But if they don't, I can live with it. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forest owns me. That's enough. Lily rested her head on his shoulder, the tension in her chest easing. We'll figure it out together. Adrian turned to her, his expression softening. "Thank you, Lily, for everything." She smiled. "We're not done yet. The forest may be free, but there's still a lot to uncover. And I have a feeling the Hollow hasn't told us all its secrets." As the stars began to emerge, the two of them sat in silence, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced and the ones they knew were yet to come. Chapter 10. The curse revealed the following days brought a strange kind of calm to Weathering Hollow. The forest, once a source of dread and mystery, now seemed subdued, as though it was taking time to adjust to its newfound freedom. Yet beneath the surface, tension still simmered among the townsfolk, their unease manifesting in sidelong glances and hushed conversations. For Lily and Adrian, however, the quiet was anything but restful. The weight of the broken curse lingered, and unanswered questions haunted their minds. What had the forest truly been hiding? And more importantly, what consequences might still await them? Lily sat cross-legged on the floor of Adrian's workshop, the ritual book spread open in front of her. Its ancient pages, filled with cryptic symbols and fragmented instructions, had been their guide to breaking the curse, but something about it still felt incomplete. "We missed something," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "The book talked about the bond being severed, but it didn't say what happens after." Adrian, leaning against the workbench, watched her with a furrowed brow. "Maybe it doesn't matter. The tree is gone. The curse is broken. Isn't that enough?" "No," Lily said firmly, meeting his gaze. "There's more to this than just you and the curse. The forest, it feels different, sure, but it's not just free. It's waiting. Waiting for what?" She shook her head. "That's what I am trying to figure out." Adrian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We could spend years digging through old books and still not have the answers. My family kept most of the records locked away. If they even exist anymore, they were probably hidden in that old cabin up on Blackwood Hill." Lily froze, her heart skipping a beat. "There's a cabin," he nodded reluctantly. "It's where I grew up. After my parents disappeared, I couldn't bear to stay there, so I moved closer to town. The place is probably falling apart by now, but if my parents kept any records about the curse, that's where they'd be. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" Lily asked, already gathering her things. Adrian shrugged. "Didn't he think it mattered? I haven't been there in years." "Well, it matters now," she said, standing. "If there's even a chance that the answers are there, we need to go." The hike to Blackwood Hill was steep and grueling, the trail overgrown from years of neglect. Adrian led the way, his movements sure despite the uneven terrain. Lily followed close behind, clutching her bag as she scanned the forest for any sign of danger. The cabin came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. It was smaller than Lily had expected, its wooden walls weathered and its roof sagging in places. Despite its disrepair, the cabin exuded an air of stubborn resilience, as though it had been waiting for Adrian to return. He hesitated at the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" Lily asked gently. Adrian nodded, though his jaw tightened. "It's just strange. Being back here feels like a lifetime ago." She placed a hand on his arm. "We'll all get through this together." Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Adrian lit a lantern, its warm glow illuminating the space. Dust-covered furniture, faded photographs, and shelves lined with forgotten belongings painted a picture of a life interrupted. Lily's eyes were drawn to a locked chest in the corner of the room. Its metal edges were tarnished and the wood was scarred, but it stood out against the rest of the cabin's disarray. "What's in there?" she asked, pointing to the chest. Adrian frowned. "I don't know. My parents kept it locked, said it was for the family's protection." "Do you have the key?" He shook his head. "No, but I might not need it." Kneeling beside the chest, Adrian pulled a carving knife from his belt and slid it into the lock. With a few precise movements, the mechanism clicked open. Inside, the chest was filled with old journals, yellowed documents, and a bundle of faded photographs. Adrian picked up one of the journals, his fingers trembling as he opened it. "It's my mother's handwriting," he said softly. Lily leaned in, her heart pounding as she read over his shoulder. The pages were filled with detailed accounts of the curse, its origins, and the toll it had taken on the Blackwood family. One passage caught Lily's attention: "The forest's power is ancient and unyielding. Though we are bound to it, we are not its masters. The pact was meant to protect, but it has become a prison. Breaking it will come at a cost not just for us, but for the forest itself. Without its guardian, the balance will shift and the hollow will face a reckoning." Adrian's breath hitched. "A reckoning," he murmured. "What does that mean?" Lily shook her head, her mind racing. "Didn't he know? But it doesn't he sound like the forest is done with us?" As they sifted through the contents of the chest, another document caught Lily's eye. It was a map of Weathering Hollow. But unlike the one she'd found in the library, this map marked more than just the forest. Circles and annotations highlighted key locations: the ancient tree, the town's church, and a cavern hidden deep within the woods. "What's this?" she asked, holding up the map. Adrian studied it, his brow furrowed. "I've never seen this before, but if my parents marked it, it must be important. Do you think the cavern could hold more answers?" "Maybe," he said, "or more trouble." Lily folded the map carefully and tucked it into her bag. "Either way, we have to find out." The night stretched on as they continued to comb through the journals and papers. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that breaking the curse was only the beginning. The forest was alive, yes, but its freedom came with consequences. The wolves, the symbols, and the strange, otherworldly energy that lingered in the hollow were all part of a larger story, one that had yet to fully unfold. And Lily and Adrian were at the heart of it. As dawn approached, they left the cabin, their minds heavy with the weight of what they'd learned. The forest around them was quiet, but it no longer felt like a place of peace. It felt like a place waiting for something or someone. "What now?" Adrian asked as they descended the hill. Lily looked toward the dark line of trees ahead, her resolve hardening. "We follow the map." Chapter 11. A dangerous pact. The map they had found in the Blackwood cabin weighed heavily on Lily's mind as they trekked deeper into the forest. Though the ancient tree had been destroyed and the curse broken, the markings on the map suggested their journey was far from over. The cavern marked at the edge of the forest loomed large in her thoughts. If the tree had been the heart of the curse, the cavern could hold the answers they still sought or dangers they couldn't anticipate. Adrian walked beside her, his movements silent and his expression unreadable. Despite his restored humanity, a shadow lingered in his eyes, as if the wolf's presence still haunted him. "What if we were walking into a trap?" he said, breaking the heavy silence. Lily glanced at him. "You think the forest would retaliate?" "It might," Adrian said grimly. The tree was its anchor, but destroying it might have set something worse in motion. She stopped, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll handle whatever comes, Adrian. Together." For a moment, his tense posture softened and he nodded. The trail grew steeper as they neared the cavern. The air grew colder, and the forest's eerie silence became oppressive. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed swallowed by the earth, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional crack of a branch. When they finally reached the cavern's entrance, Lily's breath caught. The opening was jagged and dark, like the mouth of some ancient creature. Symbols carved into the surrounding rock shimmered faintly, their glow reminiscent of the markings on the tree. The air that seeped from the cavern was frigid, carrying a metallic tang that made her stomach turn. "This is it," she whispered. Adrian nodded, his jaw clenched. "Stay close." Inside, the cavern was darker than any night Lily had experienced. The faint glow of the symbols on the walls provided the only light, casting long, flickering shadows. The air was damp and heavy, and the faint drip of water echoed in the stillness. As they moved deeper, the passage widened into a vast chamber. At its center stood an altar carved from stone, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with energy. Surrounding the altar were remnants of what looked like offerings, bones, weathered trinkets, and small jars filled with dark, congealed liquid. "What is this place?" Adrian murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily stepped closer to the altar, her heart pounding. It's older than the curse, maybe older than the forest itself. Her fingers brushed against the stone and the room seemed to shudder. The faint glow of the symbols on the walls flared, bathing the chamber in silvery light. A voice filled the air, not spoken, but felt, vibrating in their bones. Who dares disturb the pact? Adrian stepped forward, shielding Lily instinctively. We're not here to disturb anything. The curse is broken. The voice laughed, a sound that echoed like shattering glass. The curse is broken, but the forest is not free. You severed the bond, but the forest still hungers. Lily's breath hitched. What does it want? Balance. The word reverberated through the chamber, carrying an undeniable weight. What kind of balance? Adrian demanded, his fists clenched. The voice grew quieter, almost mournful. You took the heart of the forest. Now the forest demands a new one. Lily's blood ran cold. A new heart? The light in the chamber dimmed and the air grew heavier. The voice was closer now, a whisper that seemed to wrap around them. One must take the place of the tree. One must bind the forest once more. No, Adrian said sharply. We broke the curse to end this. We want to become slaves to the forest again. Then the forest will die. The symbols on the walls began to fade, the pulsing energy weakening. The ground beneath their feet trembled and cracks spread through the stone. Lily grabbed Adrian's arm. What's happening? The forest, he said, his voice grim. It's falling apart. The voice returned, louder and more forceful. Choose. Bind the forest or let it wither. Lily's mind raced as the chamber began to collapse around them. The forest's demand was clear. One of them would have to replace the tree, to become the anchor that sustained the balance. Adrian turned to her, his eyes fierce. You're not doing this. We'll find another way. And what if we don't? She shot back, her voice breaking. If the forest dies, the town will suffer. The hollow can survive without it, Adrian. Neither can I, he said, stepping closer. I just got my life back, Lily. I am not losing you now. Her heart ached at the raw emotion in his voice, but she shook her head. This isn't just about us. If one of us doesn't do this, everything we fought for will mean nothing. Adrian grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but gentle. Then it's me. The forest already had me once. It'll take me easier than it'll take you. No, she said, tears streaming down her face. You deserve to be free, Adrian. You've given enough. The voice interrupted, its tone cold and unyielding. Choose now, or the forest will take you both. Lily's gaze locked with Adrian's, a silent understanding passing between them. Time seemed to slow as they stood in the collapsing chamber, the forest's demand pressing down on them like a weight they could barely carry. Finally, Lily stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. Take me. Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. No, don't you dare, it's the only way, she said, her voice breaking. You've been through enough, Adrian. Let me do this. He shook his head, his eyes filled with anguish. I can lose you, Lily. She cupped his face with trembling hands, her tears mingling with his. You won. You'll remember me, and you'll make sure the town remembers too. Before he could stop her, Lily pressed her palm to the altar. The chamber erupted with light, the symbols flaring to life as the forest claimed her. Pain shot through her body, but she didn't let go. The voice of the forest surrounded her, whispering its gratitude, its sorrow, and its acceptance. Adrian's anguished cry was the last thing she heard before the light consumed her. When the light faded, Adrian was alone. The cavern was still, the altar dark, and the forest silent. But as he stumbled outside, the air seemed lighter, the trees more vibrant. The forest had been reborn. Adrian fell to his knees, his chest heaving as he stared at the trees, now brimming with life. Lily was gone, but her sacrifice had saved the hollow and the man who loved her. She's part of the forest now, he whispered, his voice raw. And I'll make sure no one ever forgets her. Above him, the wind whispered through the branches, carrying a familiar voice that seemed to say, I am still here. Chapter 12, Into the Heart of the Forest, the days after Lily's sacrifice passed in a blur for Adrian. The vibrant forest surrounding Weathering Hollow felt alive in a way it never had before, yet it no longer felt like his enemy. It was as though the forest itself mourned with him, the leaves whispering her name in the wind. Adrian avoided the townsfolk, retreating to his workshop, where her absence weighed on him like a physical ache. The small, quiet moments they shared, the way she tilted her head when she was curious, the fierce determination in her eyes haunted him. But grief wasn't his only companion. Something was calling him. It started with the dreams. Each night, he found himself wandering through the forest, guided by a silver light that danced between the trees. The light was familiar, comforting, and it pulled him deeper into the woods. He'd wake drenched in sweat, the faint scent of cedar and wildflowers lingering in his senses. On the third night, the dream changed. He stood at the edge of a clearing, the ancient tree reborn. Its bark shimmered like liquid silver, and its roots pulsed with an energy that seemed to reach out to him. At the tree's base stood Lily, her hair glowing in the soft light, her gaze calm but distant. "Lily," he whispered, taking a step forward. She smiled, but there was a sadness in her expression. "The forest is healing, Adrian, but its balance isn't complete." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You gave yourself to save it. Isn't that enough?" Her smile faltered. "The forest doesn't just need a guardian, it needs a bond. A link to the people who live in its shadow. Without it, the forest will still fade." Adrian clenched his fists. "Then I'll take your place." "I'll no," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "This was my choice, Adrian. I am part of the forest now, but it's not just about us anymore. You have to rebuild the connection between the forest and the hollow. You have to make them understand." The light around her grew brighter, and her voice echoed softly. "The forest isn't your enemy anymore, Adrian. It's your legacy." Adrian woke with a start, his breath coming in gasps. The dream had felt more real than any he'd ever had, and Lily's words echoed in his mind. The forest isn't your enemy anymore. Her legacy was now his burden. He couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. The next morning, Adrian made his way into the forest. He carried nothing but his resolve, determined to find the tree and see if the vision had been real. The forest welcomed him this time. The oppressive weight that had once lingered in its shadows was gone, replaced by an energy that felt warm and alive. The wolves, which had always been a silent presence, now watched him with calm eyes, their silver gazes following him as he passed. When he reached the clearing, he froze. The tree stood there, just as it had in his dream, its bark gleaming with faint silver light. Its branches stretched upward, vibrant and full of life, as if it had always been there. At its base, where the altar once stood, lay a single carving knife. Adrian approached slowly, his heart pounding. He knelt and picked up the knife, his fingers brushing against its handle. It was familiar, one of his own creations, left behind in the cavern after the ritual. The blade gleamed faintly in the light, and as he held it, he felt a connection, a tether to the forest and to Lily. "I hear you," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I'll make sure they hear you too." For the next few weeks, Adrian began his work. He ventured into town more frequently, despite the whispers and wary glances. He spoke to those who would listen, sharing the truth about the forest's transformation and the role it played in the hollow's survival. At first, people were skeptical, but Adrian's sincerity and the visible changes in the forest began to sway them. The once dying woods were thriving, their trees greener and stronger than anyone could remember. The animals, too, seemed more present, their songs and calls filling the air with life. Adrian started crafting again, using wood from fallen branches near the forest's edge to create intricate carvings. Each piece told a story of the ancient tree, the wolves, the pact, and Lily's sacrifice. He gave the carvings to the townsfolk, a tangible reminder of the bond they needed to rebuild. One evening, as Adrian returned to his workshop, he found a group of children waiting for him. They were staring at one of his carvings, a wolf with silver eyes, its details so lifelike it seemed ready to leap from the wood. "Is it true?" one of the children asked, her voice filled with awe. "The forest has a guardian now." Adrian crouched to meet her gaze. "Yes, it does. But it's not just one guardian, it's all of us. The forest needs us as much as we need it." "Will we see her?" another child asked. Adrian's throat tightened, but he managed a small smile. "You won't see her, but you'll feel her. She's in the trees, the wind, the earth. She's everywhere now." The children exchanged wide-eyed glances, their curiosity piqued. "Will you tell us more?" one of them asked eagerly. Adrian nodded. "I'll tell you everything." As the weeks turned to months, the tension in Weathering Hollow began to ease. The town, once divided by fear and suspicion, started to embrace the forest's new energy. Festivals were held to celebrate the changing seasons, and traditions were born to honor the bond between the town and the woods. Adrian became a central figure in the community, though he remained humble, always crediting Lily for the forest's rebirth. Late at night, he often returned to the clearing where the tree stood. He would sit beneath its branches, carving and talking softly, as if Lily could still hear him. "I think they're restarting to get it," he said one evening, his voice carried by the gentle breeze. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." The wind rustled the leaves above him, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard her laughter. Adrian smiled, placing the finished carving, a small wolf with silver eyes, at the base of the tree. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice steady, "for everything." And as the moon rose over Weathering Hollow, the forest hummed with life, its balance restored, and its guardians seen and unseen at peace. Chapter 13. The Silver Howl months had passed since Lily's sacrifice, and Weathering Hollow had begun to settle into a fragile peace. The townsfolk, while wary at first, had started to embrace the forest's new vibrancy. Festivals to honor the changing seasons brought the community together in a way that hadn't been seen in years, and the once divided town was slowly healing. Adrian, however, knew the balance was delicate. The forest had been freed, but its scars lingered, and the connection Lily had forged was still tenuous. It was on one of his late-night walks through the woods that he first heard it. A howl. Not just any howl, it was deep, mournful, and laced with a familiarity that stopped him in his tracks. Adrian turned, scanning the darkened trees, his breath catching as the sound echoed again. "Lily." He whispered into the stillness. There was no reply, only the rustling of leaves and the soft crunch of his boots as he stepped toward the sound. The howling continued over the next few nights, always at the same hour, always in the same direction. Adrian couldn't ignore it. It felt like a call, a pull toward something he couldn't quite explain. On the fourth night, he followed it. The forest was alive with its usual symphony of sounds, the chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, but the howl cut through it all, clear and commanding. Adrian moved quickly, the flashlight in his hand casting long, shifting shadows on the trees. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to form an almost tunnel-like canopy. The air turned colder, sharper, and the familiar hum he'd come to associate with the forest grew louder. When he reached a clearing, he stopped, his heart pounding. In the center of the clearing stood a silver wolf. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and its fur shimmered like liquid mercury. It was beautiful and otherworldly, and Adrian's breath caught in his throat. "Lily," he asked, his voice trembling. The wolf tilted its head, its gaze locking onto his. There was something in its eyes, recognition, sorrow, and a quiet strength that reminded him so much of her. For a moment, Adrian couldn't move. The wolf stepped closer, its movements graceful and deliberate. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped, lowering its head slightly, as if bowing. Adrian dropped to his knees, his chest tight. "Is it you?" he whispered. The wolf didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The connection he felt was undeniable. Tears blurred his vision as he reached out a trembling hand. The wolf hesitated, then stepped closer, allowing him to brush his fingers against its fur. It was warm, soft, and alive in a way that made his heart ache. "You re-still here," he said, his voice breaking. "You re-part of the forest, but you re-still you." The wolf leaned into his touch, its silver eyes watching him with a quiet intensity. Adrian stayed in the clearing for hours, talking softly to the wolf. He told her about the town, about how the people were slowly beginning to understand the forest's importance. He told her about the carvings he made, the stories he shared, and the way he felt her presence in every leaf and branch. The wolf listened, silent but attentive, its eyes never leaving his. When the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the wolf stepped back, its head tilting as if to say goodbye. "Will I see you again?" Adrian asked, his voice thick with emotion. The wolf let out a soft, low howl, a sound that was both a promise and a farewell. Then, with one last look, it turned and disappeared into the forest. Adrian returned to town that morning, his mind racing. He couldn't explain what he'd seen or felt, but he knew one thing for certain: Lily wasn't gone. Her presence was woven into the forest, into its heartbeat and its breath. She was its guardian now, its protector and its guide. And while he couldn't be with her the way he wanted, he could honor her by continuing the work they started. The howl became a familiar sound in Weathering Hollow. Some nights the townsfolk would hear it echoing through the trees, a low, mournful song that sent shivers down their spines. Adrian never told them the truth, never shared the secret he held close to his heart. But he knew. Whenever he heard the silver howl, he would smile, his hand brushing against the small carving of a wolf he kept in his pocket. "You re-still here," he would whisper to the wind, and the forest, alive and vibrant, would hum in reply. In Weathering Hollow, the forest thrived, its bond with the town stronger than ever. The people learned to respect its power and its beauty, guided by the stories Adrian told and the legacy Lily had left behind. And at the heart of the forest, beneath the ancient canopy, the silver wolf roamed, its howl a reminder of sacrifice, love, and the enduring bond between man and nature. The forest, the town, and Adrian were forever changed. And though Lily was no longer among them, her spirit lingered, watching, protecting, and guiding them toward a brighter future. Chapter 14, the Breaker Price life in Weathering Hollow carried on, but Adrian felt every passing day as a quiet echo of Lily's absence. Her sacrifice had brought peace to the forest and to the town, but it had come at an immeasurable cost. While the people celebrated the forest's rebirth, Adrian wrestled with the knowledge that he could never truly bring her back. Yet her presence was undeniable. The silver wolf, Lily's ethereal form, remained a part of the forest's mystery. Its occasional appearances became folklore in their own right, whispered about in the town square and among children as they dared one another to venture near the woods. For Adrian, though, the wolf wasn't a myth. It was a connection to the woman he loved, a reminder that she still watched over Weathering Hollow. One evening, while working in his shop, Adrian noticed a faint glow from the corner of his eye. He turned, his heart skipping a beat as a silvery light danced outside the window. Setting down his tools, he stepped outside into the crisp night air. The forest edge, a short walk from his workshop, pulsed with an almost magnetic energy. "Lily," he called softly. The glow shifted, moving deeper into the woods. Adrian followed, his steps cautious but purposeful. The forest had become a second home to him now, a place of comfort rather than fear. The path ahead was lit by faint moonlight filtering through the trees, and the silver glow seemed to guide him deeper. The trail ended at a small glade he hadn't seen before. The space was serene, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. In the center of the glade stood the silver wolf, its luminous eyes fixed on him. Adrian knelt, his voice trembling. "You brought me here." The wolf stepped closer, lowering its head until it was level with his. Its gaze was deep, filled with emotions that words could never capture. "I miss you," he said, his voice breaking. "Every day." The wolf's eyes softened, and it nuzzled his hand with a tenderness that made his heart ache. "What happens now?" he whispered. I don't know how to move forward without you." The wolf stepped back, turning its gaze to the ground. Adrian followed its line of sight and saw something half buried in the earth, a small wooden box. His breath caught as he crouched and brushed away the dirt, lifting the box carefully. It was plain but solid, its surface engraved with the same intricate symbols that had adorned the ancient tree. The wolf watched as he opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of parchment, old but well preserved. The symbols scrawled across it glowed faintly, and as Adrian unfolded the page, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The writing was in his mother's hand, the letters flowing in familiar curves to my son. "If you've found this, then you've already uncovered the truth about our family's bond with the forest. You carry its weight, just as I did, just as your father did before me. But the forest is more than its curse. It is alive, Adrian alive and capable of love, grief, and forgiveness. The heart of the forest is not its tree. It is its people. Those who tend to it, who respect it, who offer themselves not as sacrifices but as partners. The bond is not meant to enslave, it is meant to unite. The forest chose us for this reason, and it will continue to choose those it deems worthy. You have always been strong, Adrian. Stronger than I was, stronger than your father. You will find a way to build a future where the forest and Weathering Hollow thrive together. And if you rereading this, I know you won't be doing it alone. Love always, Mother." Adrian read the letter twice, his heart aching with a mixture of grief and clarity. The bond between the forest and its people wasn't broken, it had simply changed. The wolf stepped closer, its silver eyes glowing as it rested its head against his shoulder. Adrian closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand now," he said softly. "It's not just about the past. It's about what comes next." The wolf let out a low, mournful howl, and the forest seemed to echo with the sound. The energy in the glade shifted, growing warmer, lighter, as though the trees themselves were responding. Adrian placed the box and letter back into the ground, covering them gently. "I'll protect it. I'll protect you." The wolf stepped back into the shadows, its silver glow fading into the darkness. The following days saw Adrian take up his new role with purpose. He began working with the townsfolk, organizing community projects to restore parts of the forest damaged by decades of neglect. The stories he shared about the bond between the hollow and the woods inspired a new generation to respect the land. And though Lily was no longer by his side, her presence shaped every step he took. One night, as Adrian sat beneath the ancient tree in the clearing, he felt the forest's hum resonate around him. The silver wolf emerged from the shadows, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. It didn't stay long, but as it disappeared back into the woods, Adrian smiled. "Good night, Lily," he whispered. The wind stirred the leaves above him, carrying a soft, familiar laugh. And for the first time in a long while, Adrian felt truly at peace. Chapter 15, Aftermath in the Hollow. The seasons shifted in Weathering Hollow, marking the passage of time with the forest's changing hues. Vibrant greens turned to fiery reds and golds, and the townsfolk, once wary of the woods, began to see them as part of their lives rather than a threat looming on the edges of their community. Adrian's work as a craftsman took on new meaning. Every carving, every bench for the town square, and every ornate frame for family homes was shaped from fallen branches gathered respectfully from the forest. His hands, calloused from years of woodworking, became the bridge between Weathering Hollow and the reborn forest. The wolf's silver howl was still heard on certain nights, echoing through the trees like a song carried on the wind. For some, it was a reminder of the hollow's strange and magical history. For Adrian, it was Lily. One crisp autumn morning, Adrian walked into town with a purpose. The newly constructed pavilion in the town square was to be unveiled at the Harvest Festival that evening, and Adrian had spent months crafting it from the wood of an ancient tree that had fallen naturally during a storm. The pavilion was simple but elegant, its beams adorned with carvings of wolves, trees, and stars, symbols that told the story of the forest and the people who lived in its shadow. "Adrian!" A cheerful voice called as he approached the square. He turned to see Miriam, one of the town's older residents, waving him over. Miriam had been one of the first to embrace the forest's new energy, often seen walking the trails and leaving small offerings of flowers at the forest's edge. "The pavilion looks wonderful," she said, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "I can't wait for everyone to see it tonight." "Thanks, Miriam," Adrian replied, brushing a hand through his hair. "I am just glad it's finally done." "You should be proud," she said. "It's not just a pavilion, it's a symbol, a reminder of how far we've come." Adrian nodded, but a shadow crossed his expression. "It's not just about how far we've come," he said quietly. "It's about what we do next. The forest still needs us, and we need the forest," Miriam said. "I think people are starting to understand that, thanks to you." Adrian offered a faint smile, though his thoughts lingered on Lily. She had been the true bridge between the forest and the hollow, and he was determined to honor her legacy. That evening, the town gathered for the harvest festival. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over the square, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables filled the air. Children ran laughing between tables, while the adults shared stories and music. Adrian stood near the edge of the square, watching the celebration unfold. The pavilion stood at the center, its carvings gleaming in the lantern light. Mayor Alcott, a kindly but formal man, stepped onto the pavilion's steps and called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd, "tonight we celebrate not just the harvest but the connection we share with the land that sustains us. This pavilion, crafted by our own Adrian Blackwood, is a testament to that connection." The crowd applauded, and Adrian felt his cheeks flush. Mayor Alcott gestured for him to step forward. "Adrian, would you say a few words?" Adrian hesitated, then nodded, stepping onto the pavilion. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I am not much for speeches," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But I think it's important to remember why we're here tonight. The forest has always been a part of Weathering Hollow, sometimes as a friend, sometimes as something we feared. But it's always been there, watching, waiting." He paused, the faint hum of the forest filling the silence. "A few months ago, the forest was reborn. It's stronger now, alive in a way it hasn't been in generations. But it's not just the forest that's changed. We've changed, too. We've learned to respect the land, to see it as something we're a part of, not something we can control." Adrian's voice softened. "And for me, this pavilion is more than a place to gather. It's a reminder of what we've lost and of what we've gained. It's a promise to honor the balance Lily gave her life to protect." The crowd was silent, their faces thoughtful. Adrian stepped back, nodding to the mayor, who clapped him on the shoulder. "Well said, Adrian." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and for the first time in months, Adrian felt a flicker of hope. Later that night, as the festival wound down, Adrian found himself walking alone along the forest's edge. The lanterns in the square were still visible in the distance, their light flickering softly. He stopped beneath a towering pine, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of cedar. "Lily," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "I hope you saw that. I hope you know how much you still mean to this town. To me." The forest was silent for a moment, and then the wind stirred, rustling the branches above him. Adrian smiled, his hand brushing against the small wolf carving in his pocket. "You'll always be here," he said, his voice steady. The sound of a distant howl broke the stillness, low and mournful, carrying through the night like a melody. Adrian closed his eyes, the sound filling his chest with both sorrow and solace. "You'll always be here," he whispered again. And the forest, alive and eternal, whispered back. Chapter 16, Ghosts of the Forest. The howl that pierced the night lingered in Adrian's mind long after it faded. Though it wasn't the first time he'd heard it, something about this one felt different. It wasn't a mere echo of Lily's presence, it was a call. The forest had grown quieter over the months since Lily's sacrifice, But tonight, the air felt charged with an undercurrent of energy Adrian hadn't he sensed since the day they destroyed the ancient tree. The trees swayed gently, their branches whispering like voices just out of reach. Adrian turned his gaze toward the woods. The silvery light of the moon filtered through the mist, casting an otherworldly glow over the forest floor. He hesitated only a moment before stepping past the tree line, drawn by an unshakable feeling that he was meant to be there. The forest welcomed him like an old friend. Adrian moved with ease, following a path illuminated by faint, silvery lights that flickered between the trees like fireflies. He recognized the signs immediately, the glowing marks, the familiar hum. She's guiding me, he thought, his heart pounding with anticipation. The path led him to a clearing he hadn't seen before, smaller than the one where the ancient tree once stood. In the center of the space was a pool of still, dark water, its surface reflecting the sky above. The edges of the pool were lined with stones, each etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly as Adrian approached. As he stood at the edge of the water, the forest grew silent. Not even the wind stirred the trees. "Lily," he whispered, his voice tentative. The water rippled. Adrian took a step back, his heart racing as the ripples grew stronger, spreading outward in perfect circles. From the center of the pool, a figure began to form, rising slowly from the water. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as the light of the moon illuminated the figure, Adrian's breath caught. It was Lily. She stood there, her form shimmering like mist, her hair flowing as though caught in an invisible breeze. Her eyes, luminous and familiar, locked onto his. "Lily," he breathed, taking a step forward. Her lips curved into a soft smile, but her expression was tinged with sadness. "Adrian." His chest tightened at the sound of her voice, so real and yet so distant. I thought I'd lost you. You haven tea," she said gently. Not completely. He wanted to close the distance between them, to touch her, but something in her gaze held him back. "You've been protecting the forest," she said. "I've seen it, I've felt it, and I am so proud of you." Adrian swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I've tried. I've done everything I could to honor your sacrifice, but I still feel like it's not enough." "You've done more than enough," she said, stepping closer. Her presence was ethereal, but the warmth in her voice was undeniable. "The forest is healing because of you. The hollow is healing because of you." He shook his head. "I couldn't save you." Lily reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his. "You did save me, Adrian. You gave me a purpose. I am part of the forest now, and I'll always be here watching, guiding. But this isn't your burden to carry forever." "What do you mean?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "The forest needs a bond, yes," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But it doesn't need to take from you. It doesn't want to consume you the way it consumed my family. It wants harmony, Adrian, not sacrifice." "Then how do I help?" he asked. "Tell me what to do." Lily smiled, the light in her eyes growing brighter. "You've already started. By building trust, by helping the town see the forest not as a threat but as a partner. Keep doing that. And when the time comes, the forest will choose its next guardian not because of a curse but because of love." Adrian's breath hitched. "Will I ever see you again?" Lily's smile faltered, but her gaze remained steady. In every tree, in every whisper of the wind, in every silver howl. "I'll always be with you, Adrian. But my time here is almost over." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't go. Please." Lily stepped closer, her form shimmering as she placed a hand over his heart. Though he couldn't feel her touch, the warmth of her presence seeped into him. "You re stronger than you know," she whispered. "And you re not alone. You never will be." Tears streamed down his face as she began to fade, her form dissolving into silvery light that drifted upward like fireflies. "I love you," he choked out, his voice trembling. The light paused, swirling gently around him, and her voice came soft and clear. "I love you too." Adrian stood there long after the clearing returned to silence, the weight of her words settling over him like a blanket. The ache in his chest was sharper now, but so was his resolve. He knelt by the pool, his reflection shimmering in the moonlight, and whispered a quiet vow. "I'll honor you, Lily. I'll honor this forest. And I'll make sure no one ever forgets what you gave for all of us." The forest seemed to hum in response, a soft, melodic sound that filled the clearing. Adrian stood, his head held high, and began the walk back to the hollow. Though the pain of her loss would never fully fade, he carried with him the certainty that her love and her legacy would endure. And as the silver howl echoed through the trees that night, Adrian knew he would never truly be alone. Chapter 17, a fragile piece. The days after Adrian's encounter with Lily's spirit were a blur of activity, but the memory of her voice remained vivid in his mind. The forest felt different now, quieter, but not empty. Its energy was no longer a force of domination or control, but something calmer, almost nurturing. Adrian threw himself into his work. With each carving, each restoration project, he wove the story of the forest into the fabric of Weathering Hollow. He refused to let Lily's legacy fade into obscurity. One morning, as Adrian was repairing the old fence that bordered the town's eastern trail, a familiar voice called out to him. "Hey, Blackwood." Adrian looked up to see Henry Carver, one of the town's most vocal skeptics, striding toward him. The older man's lined face was set in a stern expression, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. "Henry," Adrian said, straightening. "What can I do for you?" Henry paused a few feet away, his hands resting on his hips. "I've been thinking about what you said at the festival, about the forest and the bond." Adrian nodded slowly, wary of where this was going. "I didn't believe you at first," Henry admitted, "but something's changed. My granddaughter, she's been walking in the woods lately. Says she feels safe there, like it's looking out for her. And the strangest thing is, I believe her." Adrian's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "The forest isn't the enemy, Henry. It never was. It just needed someone to listen." Henry frowned, his brow furrowing. "And you think we can keep it that way, without it turning on us again?" "It's not about keeping it that way," Adrian said. "It's about working with it. Respecting it. The forest doesn't want to control us, it wants balance." Henry considered this for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, you've got my support. But if things start going sideways, Blackwood, I'll be the first to call it out." Adrian smirked. Fair enough. The shift in Henry's attitude was emblematic of a broader change in the town. Slowly but surely, the people of Weathering Hollow began to embrace the forest as something to cherish rather than fear. Community members started organizing regular walks through the woods, teaching children about the trees and wildlife that thrived there. Festivals honoring the seasons grew more elaborate, incorporating new traditions inspired by the forest's rebirth. Adrian became the unofficial steward of the forest, a role he hadn't chosen, but one he took seriously. One evening, he found himself sitting with Miriam and a small group of townsfolk at the hollow hearth. The inn's parlor was warm and cozy, the fire crackling as the group shared stories and ideas for the next festival. Miriam turned to Adrian, her eyes twinkling. "Do you think Lily would be proud of what we've done?" Adrian swallowed hard, the question catching him off guard. After a moment, he nodded. "I think so. She gave everything to protect this place. It's up to us to make sure that sacrifice wasn't in vain." Miriam smiled gently. "I think you've done more than that, Adrian. You've given us hope." The months passed, and Weathering Hollow continued to change. But Adrian never stopped returning to the forest's heart, the glade where he'd last seen Lily. He would sit by the pool, carving quietly, the soft hum of the forest surrounding him like a familiar song. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adrian stood and placed a finished carving at the edge of the pool. It was a small, intricate figure of a woman and a wolf standing side by side, their gazes turned toward the stars. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice steady. The forest's hum grew louder for a moment, as if in acknowledgement. Adrian smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in months. "I'll keep listening." And as he walked back toward the town, the silver howl rose once more, a song of peace, love, and the enduring bond between man and nature. Chapter 18, The Binding Ritual, the Silver Howl, echoed in Adrian's ears as he made his way back to the hollow. The forest felt more alive than ever, its whispers carrying a new sense of purpose. Couldn't he shake the feeling that the forest was urging him toward something, a final act to solidify the balance Lily had restored. The following morning, he visited the old map they'd recovered from the Blackwood cabin, now carefully preserved and framed in his workshop. One location stood out, the symbol for the cavern where they had confronted the forest's will. The cavern had been the site of so much pain and loss, but it had also been the place where Lily had become the forest's guardian. If the balance was to hold, Adrian suspected he needed to return. Adrian spent the next day preparing. He gathered tools, supplies, and a few items that felt symbolic carvings of wolves, small trinkets Lily had once kept in her bag, and a pouch of earth from the glade where she last appeared. When he finally stepped into the forest at dusk, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. The path to the cavern was familiar now, though it felt different than before. The oppressive energy that had once marked the journey was gone, replaced by a quiet reverence. When Adrian reached the cavern, the memories of that night rushed back: the glowing tree, the wolves, the overwhelming power of the forest's demand. The altar where Lily had made her sacrifice was still there, though it was covered in moss and vines, as if the forest itself sought to obscure it. Adrian knelt by the altar, setting down the items he'd brought. "I don't know if this is what you want," he said, his voice steady but soft, "but I am here to listen. Tell me what I need to do." The cavern grew colder, and the faint hum of the forest grew louder, vibrating in his chest. The symbols on the walls, long dormant, began to glow faintly. Adrian closed his eyes, letting the forest's energy wash over him. Then, like a whisper carried on the wind, he heard it: the bond must be sealed. Adrian opened his eyes, his heart pounding. How? The symbols pulsed in time with the hum, their glow intensifying. He understood instinctively this wasn't about sacrifice anymore. It was about connection. Adrian reached into his bag, pulling out the carvings and trinkets. He arranged them carefully on the altar, each item representing a piece of the story: the wolf that had watched over the forest, the people of the hollow, and the balance Lily had restored. Finally, he placed the pouch of earth at the center, its weight a symbol of the forest itself. He knelt, placing his hands on the altar. The stone was cold, but it thrummed with life. "I am ready," he said, his voice resolute. "Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it." The forest responded immediately. A surge of light erupted from the altar, and Adrian felt warmth flood through his body. The symbols on the walls flared, their glow spreading outward like ripples on water. The energy wasn't oppressive or painful, it was comforting, as though the forest was embracing him. Adrian's vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he saw Lily standing before him. Her form was faint, shimmering like the light of the altar, but her smile was clear and unmistakable. "The forest doesn't need a guardian to suffer," she said, her voice like a melody. "It needs a partner, someone who will nurture it, protect it, and teach others to do the same. That's what you've been doing, Adrian. That's why it chose you." Tears filled his eyes as he reached for her, but she stepped back, fading into the light. "This is your forest now," she whispered, "and you'll never be alone." When the light faded, Adrian found himself standing in the cavern, his hands still resting on the altar. The carvings and trinkets were gone, absorbed into the forest's energy, but the pouch of earth remained, glowing faintly. Adrian picked it up, feeling its warmth in his palm. The forest's hum had quieted, but the connection remained. The bond was complete. As Adrian stepped out of the cavern, the forest seemed to greet him like an old friend. The wind rustled the leaves gently, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. He knew, deep in his heart, that the balance was secure. The forest had accepted him not as a cursed guardian, but as its partner. Lily's words echoed in his mind as he made his way back to the hollow: "This is your forest now, and you'll never be alone. Adrian smiled, his resolve stronger than ever. The hollow was his home and the forest was his legacy. Together, they would thrive. Chapter 19, The Wolf and the Scholar Adrian returned to Weathering Hollow just as the sun dipped below the horizon, its golden light spilling over the rooftops. The town was quiet, its streets bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. Though Adrian's steps were heavy with exhaustion, his heart felt lighter than it had in months. The forest had accepted him, not as its servant but as its partner. Lily's legacy was secure, and the bond between the forest and the town was stronger than ever. At the hollow hearth, the familiar warmth of the inn enveloped Adrian as he stepped inside. Mrs. Halloway greeted him from behind the counter, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Adrian, you look like you've seen a miracle," she said with a smile. "Something like that," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. "Well, you look like you could use a meal. Sit down and I'll bring you something." Adrian nodded, taking a seat near the fire. The inn was mostly empty, save for a few locals murmuring over their drinks. As he stared into the flickering flames, his mind wandered back to the cavern, to Lily's voice, and to the moment the forest had finally let go of its pain. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small pouch of earth he'd taken from the altar. Its faint warmth had not faded, and he clutched it tightly, as if holding onto the connection it represented. After finishing his meal, Adrian made his way back to his workshop. The space, filled with the scent of wood and varnish, had always been his sanctuary. Tonight it felt even more sacred. He placed the pouch of earth on his workbench, staring at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to carve. The wolf took shape first, its silver eyes capturing the strength and grace of the guardian Lily had become. Next came a scholar, standing tall beside the wolf, her features etched with care and precision. Adrian worked through the night, every stroke of his blade infused with memory and love. By morning, the carving was complete. It depicted Lily as she had been determined, intelligent, and kind, standing shoulder to shoulder with the wolf she had become. The detail in their gazes was hauntingly lifelike, as if they were looking into each other's souls. Adrian placed the carving on the shelf above his workbench, where it caught the first light of dawn. He smiled, though his chest ached with the bittersweetness of it all. "You'll always be here," he whispered. The carving became a centerpiece in the story Adrian shared with the town. When curious children asked about the wolf and the scholar, Adrian would tell them of the forest's guardian, of the pact that had been broken and remade, and of the woman who had given everything to ensure the Hollow's future. Was she real? A child asked him one day, her wide eyes filled with wonder. "She was more real than anything," Adrian said, his voice warm but firm. And as he spoke, the wind carried through the workshop's open window, rustling the wood shavings on the floor. Adrian paused, his lips quirking in a faint smile. She's listening. The town began to thrive in ways it hadn't in years. With Adrian's guidance, the people worked in harmony with the forest, cultivating a balance that benefited both. The festivals honoring the forest grew in popularity, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who marveled at the stories and the vibrant energy of Weathering Hollow. Adrian became something of a legend himself, though he shied away from the attention. He knew the real hero of the story wasn't him, it was Lily. One late autumn evening, Adrian found himself back in the glade where the ancient tree had once stood. The clearing was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. He knelt by the pool, running his fingers over the earth. "I hope I've made you proud," he said softly. The wind stirred the trees, and for a moment he felt a warmth settle over him, as if the forest itself was answering. Adrian smiled, his heart steady. "I'll keep going, I promise." As he rose to leave, a faint howl echoed in the distance. It wasn't mournful this time, it was strong, steady, and filled with purpose. Adrian looked toward the sound, his chest swelling with a mix of sadness and joy. "Good night, Lily," he whispered. And as he walked back toward the hollow, the forest hummed with life, its bond with the town secure, and its guardians past and present forever intertwined. Chapter 20, The Silver Dawn Winter arrived in Weathering Hollow with a quiet grace, blanketing the town and forest in soft snow. The transformation brought a kind of stillness that allowed Adrian to reflect on everything the past year had brought. The town had changed. The forest had changed. He had changed. The carving of Lily and the wolf stood proudly on the mantel in his workshop, a daily reminder of her strength and sacrifice. Though her absence was a constant ache, the connection he felt to her, to the forest, and to the people of the hollow gave him purpose. One morning, Adrian stood at the edge of the forest, watching the mist rise from the snow-covered ground as the first light of dawn broke through the trees. The scene was serene, but a familiar energy stirred in the air. The forest was calling. With a steady breath, Adrian stepped into the woods, the crunch of snow beneath his boots the only sound. He planned on a destination, but the forest seemed to guide him. The path led him to the glade where the ancient tree had once stood. The pool at its center was frozen over, its glassy surface reflecting the pale pinks and oranges of the morning sky. Adrian knelt by the pool, brushing a hand over the snow-dusted ground. The glade had become a sacred place, not just for him but for the forest itself. "Lily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I hope you're still watching." The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches around him. He closed his eyes, letting the forest's energy settle over him like a blanket. A faint hum began to rise, the sound growing stronger until it vibrated in his chest. Adrian opened his eyes, his breath catching as the pool's frozen surface began to glow faintly. The light was soft at first, a gentle pulse that radiated outward, but it quickly intensified. Adrian stepped back as the light rose from the pool like a mist, swirling and taking shape. A figure emerged, her form shimmering like the dawn itself. "Lily," Adrian whispered, his voice trembling. She smiled, her gaze as warm and familiar as ever. "It's me." Adrian's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, unable to speak. Lily stepped closer, her form solid enough to cast a faint shadow on the snow. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering near his cheek. Though he couldn't feel her touch, the warmth of her presence was overwhelming. "You've done so much," she said softly, "more than I ever could have asked." Adrian shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "It's not enough. You gave everything for this forest, for this town." "I should have," she pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "You've honored me in every way that matters. The forest is alive because of you. The town has a future because of you. But you're not here," he choked out. "I would trade everything to bring you back." Lily's smile was tinged with sadness. "I know, but this is where I belong now. The forest needed someone to guide it, to protect it, and I am at peace with that." Adrian closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking as he struggled to contain the storm of emotions inside him. I miss you. I miss you too," she said, her voice trembling. "But I am always with you, Adrian. In every tree, in every breeze, in every moment you spend caring for this place." He opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. "Will I see you again?" Lily's form shimmered, her edges softening as the light around her grew brighter. "This isn't goodbye. It never was." Her hand moved to hover over his heart, and though he couldn't feel her touch, the warmth spread through him like a fire. "You carry me with you," she whispered. "And as long as you do, I'll never truly be gone." The light began to fade, and Lily's form dissolved into the mist. Adrian reached for her, but she was already gone, her presence lingering only in the gentle hum of the forest. He stood there for a long time, the cold forgotten, his heart both heavy and light. When Adrian returned to the town later that morning, the sun was shining brightly, its rays melting the frost from the rooftops. The people of Weathering Hollow greeted him warmly as he walked through the square, their smiles a testament to how much had changed. He paused by the pavilion, running his fingers over one of the carved beams. The image of the wolf and the scholar stood out against the wood, their gazes turned toward the rising sun. Adrian smiled, the ache in his chest softening. "This is your forest now," he whispered. The wind carried the faint echo of her voice, a promise woven into the fabric of the hollow itself. And it always will be. As the years passed, Weathering Hollow thrived under Adrian's quiet leadership. The forest became a sanctuary, a place of harmony and wonder, its history preserved in stories and carvings passed down through generations. And though Lily's presence was no longer tangible, her spirit remained in the whispers of the trees, the rustle of the leaves, and the silver howl that echoed through the night. The wolf and the scholar, the guardian and her partner. Together, they had forged a legacy of love, sacrifice, and renewal, one that would endure as long as the forest itself. And as the dawn broke each morning, spilling its light over the forest and the hollow, Adrian knew this was the future they had fought for. The silver dawn.